Now, the South African Association of Freight Forwarders and the Minerals Council of South Africa say that there's a humanitarian crisis looming at the Lebombo border gate. They're calling on government to take urgent steps to address severe congestion on the Maputo corridor. Trucking companies say they've lost over R1 billion in revenue due to delays. For more on this story, we're joined by a Maputo corridor stakeholder, Barbara Mommen, and she joins us from Mbombela in Mpumalanga. Barbara, we saw this at Beitbridge not so long ago, and that situation took quite a number of weeks to be sorted out. Now you're telling us that there's something of the same nature happening at Lebombo. Talk us through how bad the crisis is there at the moment, and really how long it's been going on for.
Well, it's actually been for some months, not just weeks. We've seen since, I think, July, August this year, probably the worst border crossing times for transit traffic in 15 years. And I know this because of my previous experience of working on the corridor since 2006. And actually, the humanitarian crisis is one aspect which is fairly urgent. You know that Komatipoort is in the Lowveld. Our midsummer temperatures can reach in excess of 40 degrees Celsius, and you have truck drivers with no ablution facilities, no water and no food. And to take 3 days to cross a border in this day and age when digital availability is so common, there seems to be no excuse. And we really are suffering not only this humanitarian crisis, but a huge loss of revenue to both mining companies, transport companies, and all the supply chain players who are involved in supplying those organizations and sectors. And it has reached crisis levels, and it's been like that since end of July, August this year.
Barbara, what is the big issue here? Is there an issue of a lack of infrastructure at the border gates or backward technology? What exactly are the key issues?
Well, I think this is also slightly layered in the sense that you've got not only a border post that is considerably more congested as a result of additional cargo flow, but you've also got a border post that is certainly not geared towards clearing the numbers of vehicles that are moving through the corridor. So we've got between 800 and 1,200 vehicles in any given day. But the key issue is that the border does not operate for 24 hours. The port of Maputo, which is the key export point, operates for 24 hours. And when you have the crisis at the border post, where these delays are as a result of, I wouldn't say key infrastructure shortages, but a lack of engagement at bilateral level. We haven't seen really the intentional, focused bilateral engagements at the highest level for 6 years on the corridor. And this is something that is now playing out in a sort of latent antagonism between role players on the operational level, and it's posing a significant barrier to trade. But I think possibly the easiest way to resolve it would be to open the border for 24 hours. And this is something that has been on the agenda for, listen to this, 14 years in the making. The heads of state agreement of 2007 was between Mbeki and Gubuza in those years. But 14 years later, we still don't have a 24-hour operation. That is difficult to understand.
But what is the issue there then, Barbara? And I'm glad you bring up as one of the interventions that you want to be seen made urgently. But why wouldn't we be able to see the opening of a border? Is it an issue of regulatory constraints that exist that both governments are not to address? In terms of your engagements, what would be some of the big reasons that this has not happened for, as you've just said, 14 years?
Yeah, well, look, I think the crucial matter here is political will. And often are, over the past 15 years, we've been told that we have to wait for the Border Management Agency to be implemented before the border can operate 24 hours. Now that it's in place, the BMA themselves gave us information that this was not going to happen because there was no budget. But I found it hard to believe that a trade corridor that supports key mineral sector cargo exports cannot be open 24 hours. And honestly, the private sector has approached government in a very generous way and said, whatever you need, we'll help you do it. But we seem to be just hitting a brick wall as far as this is concerned. And, you know, the impact certainly on trade is significant because at a deeper economic level, what congestion does is undermine the competitiveness of the route for exports and imports in the region. And it has a dramatic impact on the ability of the corridor to retain its competitiveness, and certainly for mining houses and transporters to retain contracts, because our markets are very competitive, and the Port of Maputo presents a clear option for a strategic advantage towards India and the Far East. But when you've got trucks waiting in excess of 16 hours just to do a border crossing, the simplest solution would be to open the border for 24 hours so that there wouldn't be the excess of vehicles waiting in line as they are. We really need government to sit up and take notice of this need. It is so urgent, as is the urgent need for a more conciliatory, intentional bilateral engagement between South Africa and Mozambique. I know that our Mozambican counterparts have been ready for a 24-hour operation since 2010. And in our discussions with them, they've confirmed this. And it's very unfortunate, but we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And it is very, very concerning.
And of course, having detrimental economic implications, Barbara. So you've mentioned 6 interventions that are urgent and need to be implemented. We've just broken down the 24-hour border operations that need to be done. This hasn't been done in 14 years. And you mentioned another few that are very important: the establishment of a public-private partnership, corridor management, standard operating procedures when it comes to parking facilities. If we couldn't get one of these urgent interventions done within a 14-year period, how confident are you that the relevant stakeholders are going to come to the party and actually hear or listen or heed what you have to say as bodies that are suffering as a result of lackluster movement by our government stakeholders?
Look, I'm confident because we have worked very closely with a lot of government agencies that absolutely understand the imperative. And one of those is the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition. But unfortunately, their role in cross-border trade is hugely undervalued. And a department like the Department of Transport, equally important, is largely around infrastructure and regulation and so on. So there needs to be a considerable change in the approach to which government departments should be involved. And the Border Management Agency is now officially in place. And we are just hoping that we can have really positive discussions with them to implement this. To the point that private sector operators on the corridor said to us, we will pay salaries, we will put in infrastructure, just tell us what to do, just let us get our cargo to the port. Because not only is it affecting the economy, but the impact on the ability of organizations or businesses to retain those contracts is significant. To keep a ship in port, for example, waiting for cargo costs upwards of $60,000 a day. And that sort of expense, which is nearly R1 million, is untenable. We can't hope to build our economy when that kind of crisis looms. And the key thing to remember, though, is that cross-border trade is a significant indicator for economic development and sustainable economic development. And we're sitting in a position where the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is being implemented. And if the fairly simple arrangements around moving goods across borders is still so difficult, it really makes me concerned. I have huge concerns about how we deal with this in the future. But our approach is we will cooperate with government. We will work. We will consistently approach government to ensure that we have a breakthrough in this regard. And I think there's certainly a lack of understanding and insight at certain levels of the depth of the crisis. So it's important for us to keep on with that battle, as it were.
Absolutely. Barbara Mommen, thank you so much for your time this evening. She's indicating how a dire humanitarian crisis has been happening for months now at the Lebombo border, where drivers are left to dire straits just because of many inefficiencies that exist at the moment at those border posts.